Hello and welcome. This is going to be a new kind of video for me. It's going to be much more streamlined than some of my all over the place videos. I'm just going to read to you out loud an article by Ben Zweibelson and provide a little bit of commentary afterwards. So first of all, I think I'll introduce Dr. Zweibelson just very briefly. So let's see, I've got to do the screen sharing. All right, so we're here. So Ben Zweibelson. I don't know if I'm not logged into LinkedIn over here, so this might not be the place. But one place where you can always go to find out more about Dr. Zweibelson, as well as the whole military design movement, which is what Dr. Zweibelson likes to refer to in talking about some forward-thinking military professionals, people who are really focused on innovation and turning militaries into self-disruptive systems. So here, as you can see, Ben Zweibelson is the director for the United States Space Command's Strategic Initiatives Group, located at Colorado Springs, Colorado, as of February 2022. Previously, Ben was the lead design educator and facilitator for United States Special Operations Command through the Joint Special Operations University as a full-time contractor from January 2015 through February 2022. During that period, Ben provided design education and real-world facilitation across United States Special Operations Command, the Department of Defense, and the U.S. government, academia, and industry, as well as internationally and at numerous war colleges and military programs and units. And so now we get a little bit more into Dr. Zweibelson's background. Very interestingly, Ben has an undergraduate degree in fine arts in graphic design from the University of Connecticut. But Dr. Zweibelson is also a retired United States Army infantry officer and has been deployed multiple times to combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He holds 3 different master's degrees from Louisiana State University, Air Command and Staff College, and the U.S. Army School of Advanced Military Studies, as well as a doctorate in philosophy from Lancaster University in the United Kingdom. So this paragraph is just letting you know Dr. Zweibelson is a decorated combat veteran having displayed great competence in the field, great courage. And so that tells you a little bit about who we're talking about, right? Somebody who has completed a fine arts degree, but then seen combat and come back and applied the creative mind as well as, the sense of duty to security and making sure that military operations go as well as possible. Dr. Zweibelson has started to apply that motivation to what, is called design, military design. So basically being innovative, questioning, things that are often taken for granted, and trying to find new ways to do things. So with all that being said, let's turn right over to the article that I want to read to you today. And I'm going to not say anything. I'm not going to say anything of my own until I'm finished reading this entire article. So this article was published on February 20th, 2024. It's called Why Do Militaries Stifle New Ideas? It's from Volume 2, Issue 1 of Contemporary Issues in Air and Space Power. So recall, of course, Dr. Zweibelson is a member of, or the director of the Strategic Initiatives Group within United States Space Command. It's worth noting that Space Command is not the same as the Space Force. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit at a different time. So first of all, let's read the abstract. The abstract for this article, Why Do Militaries Stifle New Ideas by Ben Zweibelson. Militaries need to be as innovative and creative in drafting strategies to counter a potentially cunning adversary as they are in retaining existing efficiencies, processes, and social norms for the organization. However, modern militaries are continually chastised for our lack of imagination and inability to shake institutional beliefs that are obsolete or irrelevant. Here, we explore how and why militaries stifle new ideas and consider the pattern of outright rejection of novelty and punishment of unorthodox thinking in war. Heretics and visionaries tend to be ignored, or worse, until they end up being vindicated after the fact, which then predictably converts into a retroactive acceptance and championing of innovative thinking in conflicts. This paper is the first in a 4-part series on innovation and takes a philosophical approach to framing this challenge for defense organizations. I'm going to take a quick pause to say that of this 4-part series, 3 essays or 3 articles have been released so far. So those will be the first 3 pieces of writing that I'll be covering by Dr. Zweibelson. Pivoting now, this is now the essay proper. I will let you know when I start to say anything, which is my commentary, but that's not going to happen until I've read the entire article here. So, number 1, introduction. Militaries perpetually call for innovation, creativity in warfare, and the need for an organization to be as nimble and flexible cognitively as they might be when tangled in conflict with a cunning adversary. Yet modern armed forces are continuously chastised for our lack of imagination, inability to shake institutional beliefs that are obsolete or irrelevant, and our penchant for advocating ideological, pseudo-scientific processes as proven, unflappable, and settled constructs for warfare. Worse still, militaries honor military heretics and visionaries who were ignored, marginalized, or eliminated because they dared offer novelty that was alien and disruptive to the institutionalized norms, beliefs, and behaviors. It is dangerous to one's career and reputation to step outside the box, if the box, quote unquote, lashes back at any actual innovative activities that threaten cherished beliefs, institutional identity, or ritualized practices. Moreover, the uncertainty of success in warfare could pressure innovators to think outside the box that could potentially cause a failed campaign. The pressure of absorbing blame could fall on those who dare to innovate. Those who dare and fail are in far more peril than those who fail in compliance of set practices and doctrine, able to avoid serious punishment with, quote unquote, the enemy gets a vote, and other justifications. This paradox of desiring innovation yet suppressing the consequences of actual innovation produces a culture of convergent thinking, adherence to written and unwritten rules, and a risk avoidance mentality where only those ideas that already nest with existing constructs are welcome. At the same time, innovation still happens in war. Often, the process is organic and somewhat insurgent, blurred within the strange bedfellows of heretics, crackpots, mavericks, and outliers to the establishment. Here, we explore how and why militaries stifle new ideas and consider the pattern of outright rejection of novelty and punishment of unorthodox thinking in war that then predictably converts into a retroactive acceptance and championing of innovators. This first paper represents a 4-part series where we take a philosophical inquiry into how and why defense organizations understand innovation and often confuse how and why such activities cannot be rendered in purely scientific, rationalized, and explicitly managed processes. Indeed, the standard scientific rationalization by most in military communities assume that inductive or deductive reasoning through mechanistic, positivistic methodologies are not only adequate for innovation, but often are the only way the armed forces find any value in seeking new ideas. This 4-part series holds to a philosophical approach above such technical rationalism, and instead will introduce a series of arguments concerning how we miss the mark, punish those who are not aligned to our narrow views, and suppress experimentation due to deeper institutional and organizational beliefs that govern how we make sense of social reality, conflict, and warfighting activities therein. 2. Superficial innovation in militaries. Modern militaries need innovative thinking, yet they want that innovation to unfold in a predictable, orderly, easily managed process that retains and reinforces the legacy system. Unfortunately, innovation does not emerge this way, and thus such a mindset presents a profound tension in how modern military institutions prefer regularity and order at the expense of uncertainty and disruption. Change must occur, and in complexity science, there are few expectations that significant or meaningful change will be orderly and predictable. Yet we continue to reinforce the cliché of preparing to fight yesterday's war tomorrow, while failing to appreciate what is needed today for tomorrow's fight may be entirely unfamiliar and beyond our collective experiences thus far. Indeed, institutions fail to imagine that which is needed tomorrow due to such novelty in warfare unfolding in unfamiliar, ill-described, and confusing contexts that do not link directly to past experiences. Yet we still insist on trying to improve our position of advantage through some focus on innovation so that we might gain novel advantages unimagined by competitors and adversaries. We often fixate and obsess on technical and tactical innovation, while expecting such local or immediate developments to suffice for overarching, strategic, and game-changing transformations. Militaries fail to see the forest for the trees. Or better still, we fetishize seeking out new things and ideas that already come in recognizable packaging, complete with clear instructions, able to integrate seamlessly with all existing systems and processes. We thus create a forest of the mediocre and the mundane, bereft of anything divergent or disruptive to the established and static order. We crave trees that prop up a forest of barren originality so that the institutional identity, form, and function is protected. This begets further bureaucracy, propelling the forest toward greater risk of a flash fire when actual innovation sparks novel flames. Often, modern militaries remain well stocked with careerists and leaders who attempt to introduce and use ideas and terms such as disruption, innovation, creativity, and a host of other concepts oriented toward imagination and change. Sadly, however, quote, the rhetoric is simply camouflage designed to deflect attention from use of managerial practices and technology that disappeared decades ago in civilian life, unquote. Kroger 2020. We assimilate new concepts only superficially, stripping away the content and retaining the flashy terminology, buzzwords, so that our cherished beliefs and ritualized behaviors remain intact. Promotion of the best requires at times an asterisk, in that being more successful than one's peers while in compliance with the institutional norms is not nearly the same as forging ahead in novel directions, entirely outside the box and incomparable to any peer groupings. 3. Embracing traditional mindset. Our militaries exist in a complex, dynamic reality, but continue to orient to the past through a Newtonian-styled, factory management-themed worldview for how to approach innovation and transformation. We want to win, but only in familiar ways that reinforce our service identities and particular forms and functions as warfighters. Critics of new theories and ideas will deny their potential value by decrying that only, quote, proven, established, unquote, constructs with, quote, thousands of years of historical validity, unquote, ought to be taken seriously and never critically examined beyond whether one complies with this dominant warfare paradigm. Innovation is welcome if it extends what worked yesterday, which means that hardly anything innovative is allowed in, and obsolete practices are extended well beyond their shelf lives. Contemporary military theory and methods seek ways to innovate in warfare so that the military organization creates novel, unimagined opportunities that their adversaries have not. Innovation is important, necessary, and whether one invents the necessary change or one is dragged there by a cunning adversary through defeat and disruption, such innovation always occurs in war. However, militaries that unwittingly adhere to their particular war paradigm are institutionalized into rejecting many acts of innovation that are not immediately recognizable and able to integrate seamlessly with existing legacy constructs. Instead, in often a blatant showing of anti-intellectualism for any war theory outside the approved organizationally relevant war paradigm in practice, militaries also show outright hostility and contempt for creative war thinking that threatens disruption, change, and painful introspection, especially within established training institutions and doctrinal publications. This is a damning statement, but one that is fairly easy to demonstrate repeatedly across military services through how methods, doctrine, and belief systems demand orthodoxy and adherence to the institutional framework above all else. Colonel Mrotzek, writing in 1968 as a former infantry brigade and battalion commander of World War II, and considering the strategic quagmire that had become the Vietnam War, offers, quote, "It is a reoccurring phenomenon of history that generals and admirals who begin a war are not necessarily those who win that war. Brilliant peacetime performers have all too frequently proved disappointing and dismally inept in the throes of war. This curious phenomenon occurs because those who are smooth enough to filter into the military hierarchy in peacetime are those who are best able to mold their thoughts and activities to the system, to understand it, and to use it to their advantage. If the truth were known, probably most were conforming children who had very orthodox youth." Mrotzek, 1968. Mrotzek would challenge the convergent military institution as one that rewards conformity and obedient worshiping of established rituals and behaviors, even at the expense of military successes in war. Such conformity suggests a repeating feedback loop of the same uncreative conformists rising in rank through the system, only to reinforce that system for the subsequent generation, ensuring only those that think or just as they did follow them up the promotion ladder. Quote, they find their ability as they go through their careers to become part of the deep-seated customs and traditions of the services, and in due time they filter to the top as both the models for and the perpetuators of the system, the supporters of its laws that will in turn perpetuate them and their way of life. Mrotzek, 1968. In other words, institutions institutionalize, and militaries are perhaps the biggest offenders of this cycle by strangling out change and innovation that threatens the legacy system. Gara Jadagi in 2011 addressed modern society writ large and this bias toward retaining institutionalized beliefs and patterns of self-relevant behaviors despite their increasing irrelevance in emergent system change offers. The quote, the inability to change an outdated mode of organization is as tragic for the viability of a corporation as the consequence of missing a technological break is for the viability of a product line, unquote. This preference to resist the novel and alien so that the familiar and favored is retained stems from a fundamental mischaracterization of innovation. Modern militaries assume all aspects of complex warfare can only be interpreted through a rationalized, natural science lens that reverse engineers warfare analytically. 4. Humans are naturally creative. Carl Weick, a noted sociology and organizational theorist, provides one useful explanation of how humans imagine, create, and also conform to organizational frames. All innovation is accomplished through human imagination, in that, quote, imagination gives form to unknown things. Weick, 2006. That the unknown must come in alien, paradoxical, and highly disruptive forms and functions to the institutionally familiar and cherished is the primary tension in why modern militaries reject innovation. We are conditioned to protect the familiar and legacy frame, and, by doing so, frequently resist imagining beyond self-imposed limits. Individually, a military organization does have imagination and creativity, but often such activities occur in the margins, often under secrecy or away from the forces that throttle such dangerous affairs. In other words, innovation oozes out the seams of the institutional straitjacket. Yet creative people can and do champion transformation and innovation despite these barriers. It is what makes our species unique. And ultimately, despite such institutional rigidness, particularly in modern defense culture, innovative activities generate all instances of change in conflicts, defense, and security affairs. Our species imagines beyond the mere existent and proximate. We can conceptualize what has been, what could be, and beyond this, what never was, yet could be created and ushered into reality in an act that transforms said reality itself. Harari, in explaining the rise to dominance of the human species, provides useful context in how humans can conceptualize that which does not exist in the real world. While this first step occurs in a single mind, humans then employ narratives to convey these fantastic ideas to convince others about things that they themselves had not yet imagined either. Quote, telling effective stories is not easy. The difficulty lies not in telling the story, but in convincing everybody else to believe in it. Much of history revolves around this question. How does one convince millions of people to believe particular stories about gods or nations or limited liability companies? Yet when it succeeds, it gives sapiens immense power because it enables millions of strangers to cooperate and work towards common goals. Just try to imagine how difficult it would have been to create states or churches or legal systems if we could speak only about things that really exist, such as rivers, trees, and lions. Harari, 2018. Imagination sparks the development of the unimaginable into the realized and useful. This is the only way that invention occurs. Invention itself is the tangible act of humans realizing the intangible, in a novel, previously unrealized way so that new opportunities and consequences occur in this deliberate creation, to include many subsequent ripples that the creator could not foresee. In these moments of innovation, the creator lacks terminology and may need to also craft entirely new conceptual models, perhaps modify or generate new theories, so that the invention gains some form that can be shared and understood by those unfamiliar with and surprised by the change. Every act of military innovation requires this, and with the ushering in of the unrealized and the unprecedented, the military institution tends to resist it because of these surprising qualities. It is not only that new things require new names, but invention destroys before it creates. The act of innovation starts with a fantastical leap into the unknown because the current system is insufficient or faulty in such a way that a creative act is warranted. We create because the legacy frame must, in some small or great way, be destroyed. 5. Innovation and military doctrines. Institutions do not willingly operate through destructive and disruptive activities if they challenge the very constructs that sustain the organizational identity, beliefs, and known patterns of behavior. This is why innovation cannot be manufactured or built into existing institutional processes that require convergence, uniformity, reliability, predictability, stability, order, and conformity. Military doctrines are indeed the last place where innovation might be found, in that any novelty or disruptive innovation that might occur will be assimilated and stripped down so that it can only integrate with the pre-existing legacy frame championed by the military institution producing the said doctrine. While critical and creative thinking are mentioned within such managerial decision-making methodologies found in doctrine, militaries cannot allow such activities to threaten the core belief systems or venture past clear paradigmatic boundaries imposed by the institution. One must be critical and creative only so that new coloring might occur within the predetermined lines set by the dominant war paradigm. These qualities maintain an institution and extend bureaucratic effects so that they manifest across all participants. Effective organizations tend to be adaptive instead of innovative, in that the innovation is done in the fringes and peripheries of how an organization functions. Once innovation is realized, the bureaucratic entity adapts it through assimilation, often while experiencing damage or losses due to the legacy practices advocated by the institution failing in new ways. These failures occur because of how the innovation disrupts or changes the system. Militaries maintain institutional control and stability through convergent doctrinal processes with an epistemological position that essentially claims, quote, anything new must be clearly understood by the entirety of the force in recognized language and easily validated through established practices so that immediate advantage can be gained in a reliable, risk-reducing mode of execution, unquote. This presents a convergence of deductive and inductive logics on how innovation ought to occur so that the institution experiences incremental process improvement and not radical, surprising, and transformative change. Brown, a security theorist, provides a blistering critique of the modern military culture as adapted in the Pentagon, where the entire institution remains wedded in the past, while rejecting any call to transform and discard outdated theories, beliefs, and concepts that are now ritualized into institutional identity. Quote, within the Pentagon and Department of Defense culture, stolid managerialism is the default, and people are too often treated as interchangeable widgets in an immense industrial machine. Founded on a doctrine of hierarchical control, informed by both the military traditions and the pseudoscientific management theories of the 19th century, it has elevated conformity to virtue and excels at stifling dissent. Initiative and creativity are just collateral damage. Information flows up, or is staffed in defense parlance, and power trickles back down. Important leaders choose less important leaders. Everyone else competes within the rigid confines of a civil service system that we've known to be fundamentally broken for decades. Compensation is commensurate with status and tenure, not talent or contribution. Tasks are assigned, performance is evaluated, rules are promulgated. forming the basis of a culture of risk aversion that makes the faithful maintenance of the status quo a much safer bet than attempting to challenge it. Pentagon reporter Jeff Shogol perhaps put it best when he compared the Defense Department to, quote, a Sears mail-in catalog that is struggling to stay relevant in an Amazon Prime world. Double unquote. All of that from Brown, 2021. This modern military frame is an extension of one crafted largely in the 18th and 19th centuries through a fusion of Napoleonic war theorizations, the consequences of the rise of Westphalian nation-states, and the adaptation of Newtonian-styled scientific logic to explain war in objective, predictive, and largely mechanistic terms. Management of war would become factory-like, built within the Industrial Revolution and oriented toward increasing efficiencies, uniformities, and process adherence. Modern militaries believe that art is oppositional to science, with scientific rationalization in war superior to artistic aesthetics. Mratzek, 1968. Gara-Jedagi, a complexity theorist, provides an excellent rebuke of this Newtonian-styled epistemology on how innovation unfolds. Complex reality does not function this way. As discussion. Innovation occurs in surprising, often confusing ways, where at first an organization may only have glimmers of the opportunity, and those that realize it may struggle with dense theory and require new words and models to develop it. Over time, an organization experiments and develops this innovation, gradually refining and maturing it, so that the last step for institutional change is one where the entire organization gains some common understanding or framing. This inverts the modern military paradigm in that common understanding across the entire enterprise becomes the last, not the first step. Gara-Jedagi summarizes the absurdity of forcing all innovation to first clear the bar with new learning being immediately understood across the largest population with, quote, I assure you that we will fast fall to the lowest level of banality. Life would proceed with setting and seeking attainable goals that would rarely escape the limits of the familiar. Gara-Jedagi, 2011. Modern military fixation on oversimplification of all novelty extends from earlier periods of factory-styled order and discipline, and likely a paradigmatic lack of awareness of how strong this Newtonian stylization grips the force. Weick offers an important distinction in how organizations resist innovation and instead encourage a self-serving, institutionally relevant mode of creation. Citing Coleridge, Weick explains that, quote, fancy operates in a mode where the institution insists on recombining known things and concepts in institutionally recognizable ways, compliant and orthodox, to extending that institutional paradigm from yesterday to tomorrow. Weick uses the mythical creature Pegasus to illustrate. Pegasus is a static combination of two known ideas, wings and horse. The concepts are already well understood by the institution, and, quote, neither idea changes nor interacts with the other. They are simply stuck together. Mratzek draws from Edmund W. Sinnott by terming this as, quote, deductive creativity, unquote, where military staffs plan operations by channeling a conditioned sort of creative thinking within a productive pattern that adheres to existing processes that generate logically sound solutions readily accessible for military applications. When organizations prefer fanciful thinking to innovation, they are defaulting to an institutionally self-relevant mode of extending yesterday's favored concepts into an uncharted tomorrow, assuming along the way that solutions proven trace straight lines to the next ill-defined problems. Dorst explains this static, linear interpretation of a complex reality with, quote, conventional problem solving requires us to stop the world, isolate the problem, and come up with a one-off solution. This approach is curiously non-experimental. All organizations will initially try to approach a new problem in ways that have worked in the past, unquote. Dorst, 2015. Weick reinforces this organizational habit with, quote, when people settle for fancy, the problem is that their choice of current frames is too dependent on frames previously used, unquote. Weick, 2006. Advocates of modern military doctrine tend to miss this distinction in that they are convinced that fanciful content is innovative when it merely recycles approved institutionalized forms into different combinations. While it may barely qualify for innovation, anything beyond this automatically becomes too disruptive to ever include into military doctrine without breaking the mold. Thus, all innovation occurs in the peripheries and margins of a military enterprise, often pushed by mavericks, heretics, and improvisationalists who refuse to conform to the existing system. Schogel, citing Kroger on the institutionalized patterns of conforming behavior in the Pentagon, illustrates how difficult it is to break from the party line. Quote, more disturbing than the Pentagon's antiquated information technology was Kroger's description of meetings in the building, where subordinates are expected to keep quiet rather than ask questions. Quote, instead of interjecting their own questions or raising alternative points of view, they're encouraged to, quote, stay in their own lane, Kroger wrote. Quote, the purpose of many of these meetings is not to make a decision, but, quote, to update leaders on progress. There are no whiteboards, no thinking out loud, and usually no analysis. Almost everything is scripted. In other words, the purpose of these meetings is for Pentagon leaders to let everyone know that they are handling things perfectly. Any objection to groupthink is heresy because it implies subordinates might actually understand an issue better than their superiors. The meetings themselves are useless, and the information could just have easily been sent by email. Unquote. All of that from Schogel 2020. Fanciful creation generates novelty in that Pegasus does not exist in nature, but this configuration is merely a realignment of known things that already do exist. As illustrated previously, not only is fanciful creation a standardized mode for institutional convergence across the modern armed forces, but it is also a common practice to hold senior level meetings that perpetuate the utility of Pegasus-style thinking as successful and the only option. Wings are good, horses are good, and combining wings plus horses over and over is the best and only option. Or else. The institution retains both original concepts. And while Pegasus is a new naming device, the original paradigm remains unaltered in that nothing is disrupted, destroyed, or challenged in some critical manner of self-examination. As Weick offers, quote, when people engaged in fancy, they produce simple associations of adjacency rather than the compound associations of simultaneity. They link one point to another rather than form clusters of multiple links around one point, and their ideas grow incrementally rather than exponentially. Unquote. Weick, 2006. Thus, an institution such as the Pentagon can maintain the illusion of progress by promoting fanciful production of known knowns, with operators instructed to carry on in scripted, ritualistic fashion to toe the party line. It is this incremental matter of fanciful development that the institution seeks, so that an orderly, controlled, and linear mode of progression retains all the institutional beliefs, patterns, and framework, while the fanciful additions enhance or otherwise retain the paradigm relevance. Seven, conclusion. Innovation unfolds in direct opposition of fancy, in that innovative efforts threaten the preferred illusion of order, control, and stability. This is where the heretics thrive or are slaughtered. Mrotzek, drawing from early human behaviorist theory on creativity in the 1960s, suggests that military forces restrict creative thinking in that, quote, a soldier is saddled with an extra measure of restriction when he must observe the additional military regulations, codes of conduct, and tactical doctrines essential to the operation of a disciplined and effective modern fighting force, unquote. Mrotzek, 1968. Most people in these institutionally restrictive, regimented environments may, quote, find it too difficult to try and think innovatively under these burdens. They lose hope, their intellectual energy wanes, and they sink into apathy, content to follow the channels of thought approved by the omnipotent majority, unquote. Mrotzek, 1968. This is how we go about failing at war in a familiar, institutionally championed form and function that is somehow more acceptable than creatively taking novel risks to innovate away from the known knowns. The next paper in this 4-part series continues this examination of why and how military forces struggle with innovation in war. Zweibelson and Press. All right. So that is the entire essay. Why do militaries stifle new ideas? I'll just read through the names that were referenced. I didn't always read all of the references for the sake of flowing through the text. But Bousquet from 2008, Cyberneticizing the American War Machine, Science and Computers in the Cold War. Brown, Z from 2021, The Pentagon's Office Culture is Stuck in 1968. The U.S. National Security Bureaucracy needs a severe upgrade. Dorst, K from 2015, Frame Innovation, Create New Thinking by Design. From, J from 2005, Types and Forms of Emergence. Gara Jadagi from 2011, Systems Thinking, Managing Chaos and Complexity, a Platform for Designing Business Architecture. Harari, Y from 2018, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. Kroger, J from 2020, Office Life at the Pentagon is Disconcertingly Retrograde. Mrazek, J, 1968, The Art of Winning Wars. Paparone, C, 2017, How We Fight, A Critical Exploration of U.S. Military Doctrine. Shogel, J, from 2020, August 22, it's my birthday, by the way. The Pentagon is a shrine to antiquated technology where creative thinking goes to die. Tsoukas, H, 1998, Introduction, Chaos, Complexity, and Organization Theory. Waring, S, from 1991, Taylorism and Beyond, Bureaucracy and Its Discontents. Vike, K.E., 2006, The Role of Imagination in the Organizing of Knowledge. And four pieces by Ben Zweibelson. The first from 2015, One Piece at a Time, Why Linear Planning and Institutionalisms Promote Military Campaign Failures. Dr. Zweibelson from 2016, Linear and Nonlinear Thinking, Beyond Reverse Engineering. Zweibelson from 2023, Understanding the Military Design Movement, War, Change, and Innovation. And finally, by Dr. Zweibelson in the Press, Innovating in New Operating Domains begins not in the pragmatic and known, but in the fantastic and weird. All right, so that concludes my presentation to you of Dr. Zweibelson's article. I'm going to offer just a few minutes, just a few observations, because, you know, my commentaries often wind up going very long, but I'd really just try and put a few points into a nutshell for you here. So I just want to call attention, in case you are interested in a more extended commentary, which is, again, highly unstructured, will definitely take some patience. But I do think that the way that I have been recording YouTube videos is interesting. You know, I'm very much, or I have to this point, very much been engaging in experimentation, free association, really just letting my ideas go where they're taking me and showing not necessarily sources, you know, showing Wikipedia articles, showing various articles and things, just letting you know the things that I'm thinking about are not just things that I've dreamed up, right? So I don't know why Skype keeps trying to do things. But so what I want to call to your attention, first of all, is that my theory on enchodification, my video on enchodification theory is highly relevant to this article by Dr. Zweibelson. So enchodification is a very playful way of putting it, but it basically is a way of talking about the way in which people are provincial. We can be short-sighted. And sometimes we can talk about that as, you know, an aspect of human nature, right? I think that David Hume talks about this, for example, in his treatise on human nature, where he's talking about how people in general have a predisposition to care more about what is close to us than what is far away. And that may well be true. There may be some, you know, legacy disposition that we've inherited just as biological entities. But my theory of enchodification points out that this is also something that we do to ourselves. Now, there's a lot to that. But one element that I think is very important to open up as soon as possible in conversation with Dr. Zweibelson's important work is to talk about the motivations for why people are discouraged from thinking creatively and from thinking outside the box. Why is it that, and I mean, this is what this whole article is about, right? But where what an avenue of answering that question that I don't see in Dr. Zweibelson's work to this point is that there is a motivation when you are administering a bureaucracy which contains hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, and interfaces with other bureaucracies. So that, you're trying to coordinate the activities of millions of people, and you're dealing with not, obviously the military concerns bleed into economic concerns and cultural concerns. So when you are thinking in the very big picture about national security or security more broadly than the national context, then you are concerned with basically these mega mass trends and what people are thinking and doing. And so what I'm trying to impress upon you is that there's a motivation that people should not be creative. People should not drift outside the lines because, we need recruits, right? We need people to go to the army, right? We need people to major in business or whatever. We need people to not disrupt business as usual, right? Which means that there are basically social engineering concerns for why, we try to inculcate things like caring about sports or, being overly concerned with money or status or, following what people are doing on Instagram. All these are ways of getting people to be quite self-absorbed in a way that prevents them from disrupting large-scale institutional processes. And I come from a milieu of people who would normally be saying like, oh yes, here is the bureaucracies, they're stifling our freedom, right? They're colonizing our minds, right? And to a certain extent, that's true. But I think in order to as Dr. Zweibelson, I think so cavalierly says, if we're going to hold a philosophical approach above such considerations, and this is where just to I will go off a little bit. Oh dear, because I want to talk about Baudrillard's discussion of logical types, which he's drawing from Anthony Wilden or Anthony Wilden. I'm not exactly sure. But so, I mean, and again, Baudrillard is characterizing this, or I mean, through Wilden, is characterizing this in terms of dissent, right? But so, I mean, if, as Zweibelson has been talking about in this article, I think that, I'm opening up into a different topic here, but, we can dissent from the way that things are being done without overall, being hostile to the aims of an institution, right? So if we're talking about, the military, the military might have as one of its goals, right, security, right? You don't want all of our important people and objects and stuff to be destroyed. That's great. But, if we sit here and we say, well, actually, institutional doctrine is making it more likely that our important people and things are going to be destroyed, then all of a sudden you're dissenting, right? You're a heretic, right? As Zweibelson is talking about, right? But that doesn't mean, like, coming back over to Baudrillard, that doesn't mean that we have to consider ourselves as, completely oppositional to the system, whatever that means. I think, again, I think it's inspiring that Dr. Zweibelson is, again, so clearly saying, we want to hold to a philosophical approach above. And he's talking right now about technical rationalism, but, we can hold a philosophical approach above, such basic considerations as like, oh, I'm for or against the military. It's like, what are you talking about? What is the military? The military should be self-disruptive. So it's not against anybody to try and challenge current ways that are being done. So I just want to hammer home this idea, going back to the institutional motivation for basically keeping people dumb, dumbing people down. I think this is a motivation which arises from the interpersonal level. This is an insight that I had a couple of years ago, but it basically dawned on me that the reason why we often internalize norms, we often, really control the way that we behave. The reason why we're doing that is that we are playing dumb for other people so that they will not basically distrust us as much. I keep coming back and back to, the Hobbesian trap dynamic, and this has to be kept in mind at all times. We cannot take it for granted that there should be any institution where people are able to coordinate their behavior at all. So, when we are sitting here talking about, these ritualized things and embedded, like those are the social technologies that allow there to be, a military organization in the first place, right? If these sorts of doctrines had never been laid down, there wouldn't be an institution to innovate, right? And so this is basically the from the progressive or whatever, this is the range, right, of tradition. And so tradition must be taken into account and not dismissed. I really appreciate Dr. Zweibelson's strong language because I am also the kind of person who has been more of an innovator, and I have faced that punishment. I have faced that demoralization, and it's a very serious problem. Like, I'm sure, like, I haven't, whatever, it's had costs on my life, but I'm sure other people in similar situations have taken extremely self-destructive actions. I'm trying not to use too inflammatory or upsetting language. But so I appreciate Dr. Zweibelson really going to bat, and also for himself, right, for these innovators, because we do get at times this sort of hostile response, and I am like, anyway, I have another topic that I want to get to, but basically I want to say that not only do I face this in normative context. For example, I was at Duke University. I wanted to study military or United States grand strategy. And there was a professor named Joseph Grieco who completely dismissed my ideas, right? I was sitting there talking about why are we, I was challenging some of the basic terms that we would discuss in class. And I would alternately be told that, oh, well, everybody understands it's not that simple. And yet, this doctrinal conformity would still be imposed. And my ideas for what I wanted to research were not encouraged. And I was basically shunted into, I'm going to do a literature review of these two books that Joseph Greco thinks that I should do. And I, at that point, dropped out of Duke University because, I couldn't take it, right? There's a lot more that goes into it. But, I face this sort of punishment or, this innovation pressure or whatever in this sort of normative context, right? Because I've always felt out of place in, normal educational contexts. But then, pivoting over to what is often critical of these sorts of paradigms is, basically like social justice, intersectional theory, things looking at race, class, gender, all these sorts of places. I also face an innovation pressure there because, of course, look at me, right? I'm a white guy, right? So there's a standing lack of distrust, right? There's a distrust issue because people often assume in those spaces that, I'm what to say. I reproduce like the doctrines and ritualized practices, if you want to put it this way, that characterize, these identity categories of white and male. And to a certain extent, maybe I do, right? But recently I'm about to go talk with some of my co-organizers, right? Because somebody was saying to me that, they don't want to be talked over on social theory by a white man. And, that some things are beyond philosophy, right? I don't aspire to talk over anybody, but I was just setting my intention, right? Just letting people know that, I have my own ideas and we have a mission statement, which is, it talks about anti-capitalism and colonialism and all this stuff. And it's like, I'm willing to co-sign, and we've been having some film screenings. That's what we do. We have film screenings and discussions, and those go great. But, do I actually buy in on a first order basis into all these concepts? No, I don't. Because within, the social justice movement or whatever, this exact same thing is going on. Those movements, I don't know if you'd say they have less success, but I mean, they're obviously less established than things like the United States freaking military, right? But at the same time, we have institutional beliefs And this is the kind of thing which is often, within these informal networks, this is downplayed, right? Like with the whole idea of racism is prejudice plus power, it's a little bit of a outdated formulation. But, people would basically say, oh, well, there is no institutional power for non-white people or, women or whatever. And that's just not true, right? I mean, it's not to say that these forms of oppression and marginalization are important. And, I've recently been turned on to Dr. Zweibelson's colleague Jacko and his work on Project Interalliance, which has everything to do with these sorts of making military cooperation possible among people of different identities, and that has everything to do with diversity, equity, inclusion. And so these sorts of ideas should not be dismissed. And the post-colonial perspective, or whatever. Oh, there's my mom. All these sorts of things are valid topics of discussion. The question, though, is how do we get rigid about it? And how do we all of a sudden get it to where, oh, we can't question this, we can't question that, because that's beyond philosophy now, right? Like, we don't, like, it really bothers me, because where are we seeing adequate emergency response, right? We face a planetary state of emergency, right? And beyond. We face a cosmological state of emergency. So where is the adequate response? I frankly don't see it, right? We see the shoots of it. I'm not trying to disrespect any of the important work which is being done right now. But in terms of establishing a firm beachhead and a firm front and a firm, coalition that people can rally toward in case they are ready to set aside some of these, cherished beliefs, or not necessarily that they have to, right? But at least put them into question. And let's maybe re-articulate them in ways that might be more effective, kind of thing, But so we don't see that. That's what I'm interested in trying to establish, sort of more on the civil side, right? So sort of like a civil service, civil defense sort of initiative to parallel what's going on in the military design movement, to sort of signal that it's time for all of us to raise our game. And part of what I was basically saying in the beginning about enchodification is that I think in order to do that, we have to, it's the traditional, thing conservatives say to liberals or whatever, but it's like, you got to think about why things are the way they are, right? So Zweibelson talks about, established, cherished beliefs, or things that become ritualized practices. And in particular, this dynamic in a meeting where the point is basically to perform that the leaders are competent. But so think about why that happens, right? There's a distrust issue, right? Think about the issue of fragging, officers in Vietnam, right? Soldiers would kill their own commanders because they didn't trust them or their competence. So, like, I can understand why, within the military and within even the whole national project or whatever, there is a deep-seated obedience and basically inculcation that we are not fit to question what is going on. Because if we did feel that we were fit to question, people would question everything all the time. And it would be much more difficult to have any semblance of order. Now, that's not to say that it's not good to question. Because the problem is that the semblance of order that we currently have seems to be trending toward all of our deaths and destruction, right? But, that doesn't just mean that we say, oh, well, all this order is bad and, who cares about the United States of America anyway? Like, I'm certainly willing to entertain those kinds of ideas. But again, as Harari was saying here, nothing is more important than trying to get people to believe stories by the millions, right? And so, it's not really realistic to, just immediately overnight, change people's minds about what it means to have a nation, or what the ontology of the state is, or what the legacy of major world religions should be, or, what the nature of political ideology, like what's the correct interpretation of Marxism, right? Marxists can't even freaking agree about that, right? Much less, anybody agreeing about anything, right? So, anyways, I just wanted to draw out this point that the reason why we have all this stifling and conformity is that there's a lot of chaos and disorder from our perspective, right? Basically things that are unstructured, emotion, right? So going back to, this rationalist thing, right? Well, what's going on? What is there aside from reason, right? Uh, you know, um, Emotion, right? So, I mean, that's why in my college grad school application essay, which is called Metonymy Economy, I talk about going over here, cognitive affective science, right? Cognitive affective poetic social science. So, like, it's very important to bring out emotion, but that's very tricky, right? Have you ever had an emotional conversation? Have you ever tried to, soothe somebody distrust, for example? Like a notable element of distrust dynamics is that bringing them to awareness makes them worse in the short term. Like, imagine just with an interpersonal relationship, like out of nowhere, you just say, "Well, I've never killed anybody." And it's like, I don't know, you probably haven't killed anybody either, but why would you bring it up? Now I'm thinking about it. And there's much more sort of relevant examples, but it's like lots of times when we're in social situations, we're choosing to speak on things, to bring them to other people's attention, or we are very intentionally remaining silent because it's better not to have those things brought to other people's attention. And that's also where we have to trust ourselves, because at the level where we're withholding information so that distrust does not spike, we have to trust that we're not just being manipulative. It's not just that we want to hide our intentions so other people can do things that they wouldn't do if they knew how we really felt. It's more so a paradox where everything is fine, but if we communicate about how we really feel and how we're thinking about things, it will open up more uncertainty and distrust in somebody's mind. So it's like if I tell you, I don't know, like I tell you a little bit, like I don't know, I got a speeding ticket. All of a sudden, like if you, how to say, you've gotten a speeding ticket too, right? So you don't think that I'm a bad person just because I got a speeding ticket. But, in your mind, you're thinking, well, if somebody got a speeding ticket, I wonder, have you driven drunk? Like, what else have you done that's reckless? And it's like we can see internally, like, well, the other person, for example, is thinking, well, I've sped, but I never drove drunk or whatever. But they don't know what my revelation might imply or, what else is going on beneath the iceberg, right? So that's just something that's got to be navigated. So, again, back to Dr. Jackson's, project Inner Alliance. That would be a very difficult dynamic. Because even in the topic of trying to discuss what it takes to achieve a sense of common purpose while having the fluidity to be questioning a lot of cherished beliefs, what to say? The act of going meta, the act of abstracting over all these issues, it opens up further first order issues. So what I mean by that is, we can talk very abstractly about the problem of, emotional dynamics and distrust in a military or organizational setting. But us talking about this in this intellectual, abstract way doesn't prevent those sorts of emotions of distrust or whatever from arising in us in that moment, right? So that's what I mean by first order. Like the emotions are like it's happening right now. So, so I wanted to basically highlight this idea of logical types, and this is the preface to Symbolic Exchange and Death. And Baudrillard's point here is basically that that Marxism is not good enough anymore, because what he says is that all of political economy has become a simulation model, and that this is just not determinative anymore. Everything you think is a root cause is really a symptom, and to figure out the root cause is what's important. And if you aren't actually able to understand how the world works or what makes things appear to be the way they are, there is no way that you're going to change it. It's sort of like, you're fighting a drone battleship, right? That's in the sky and it's releasing drones and you're trying to fight the drones, right? But the problem is it has a factory up there, right? It's like the thing that you actually have to hit is somewhere else. Right. And if you never actually target the source of the issue, you're never going to actually defeat the problem, even if you can hold it at bay for a while. So the question is, when we apply that kind of a metaphor to the security issues that we face, the question is, what does it mean to go to a higher logical type? And so again, I interpret this. I'm not exactly sure. I need to get more into Wilden. But, I think this has to do with Bertrand Russell. So it's basically about abstracting over sets and sets and sets. This is meta. This is abstraction. So basically, like, you can never defeat, a system except by abstracting over everything that it's abstracting over. So similar, like in a Napoleonic context, unless you have, a national fighting force of hundreds of thousands of people, you're probably not going to beat Napoleon, right? So in order to, defeat Napoleon, you got to have people, you got to have, the intent to do so, but you also need to have this. You need to have logical types. You need to have a sophistication of organization, because, things like, can you be easily scouted? How complex are your troop movements in battle? Like, these kinds of things will influence whether or not you are able at all to contest, a very, as Zweibelson says here, cunning adversary. So all that being said, the last topic that I wanted to bring up again was the role of colonialism to this section here. And I think it's so important. I am basically trying to have a new kind of conversation about colonialism and, the legacy of European, what do we call it? It's the Great Divergence, right? I believe that's something people say. So the idea is, right, if you look at this, here's China, India, down here at the bottom. And here is, what is this? GDP. This is an abstraction, right? This money thing is not fundamental. But, if you just look at these lines, right? Look at how powerful, these European countries are becoming, while India and China are basically where they were, in 1500, right? And so this is the impact of European colonialism, right? And so it's important to reframe. Colonialism is total war. Colonialism is warfare. Colonialism can as a term can function as a euphemism. What colonialism is, it involves conquest, it involves human trafficking, it involves mass rape, it involves murder on a systematic basis, it involves a complete lack of freedom, it involves withholding, not just things like literacy or whatever, but destroying cultural knowledges. It involves displacing families. It involves splitting them up. There basically is no form of violence which is not included and foundational to the practice of colonialism. And that is what generates this graph, right? So when people talk about ill-gotten gains or whatever, it's a big thing where it's like, well, how can we moralize about what happened? In a way, I agree, right? I'm not here to say that any of this should not have happened. But the point is, this was an incredibly violent process, and people are going to feel some type of way about it, and they're going to be revisionist powers, right? There's no getting around that. And so what I'm interested in is the way in which we can find win-win solutions here, right? Because as Zweibelson is saying, the Western military establishments, which are basically the successor powers to all of these colonial regimes, and the beneficiaries of all these colonial regimes, these militaries are now in a place where they need to change their own ideas, right? And so I would basically submit to you that, Dr. Jackson in the work and project Inner Alliance, think about, you basically want that level of solidarity, understanding, camaraderie, and interfaceability among everybody, right? That's what it's going to take to build a social fabric adequate to the 21st century. And so that's what I want to focus on. And the reason why it is important to discuss colonialism in a new way is that we are stuck in completely two terribly inadequate worlds when it comes to discussion of, European colonialism and all these things. Either, you have a bunch of, frankly, well, I'm not gonna call them names, but you have Western civilization triumphalists or whatever who basically are back over here, right? They are celebrating, scientific rationalism and managed processes, right? And it's all about, just get fit and, have a family and, get a good job. And it's just like, that's not an answer to systemic challenges. That's not an answer to artificial intelligence maybe killing us. That's not an answer to great power conflict, maybe killing us. That's not an answer to ecological catastrophe, perhaps killing us, right? And so, on the other hand, right, we have, a framework which is the post-colonial framework, which often, there's a lot of subtlety, there's a lot that I don't understand, but when it comes to, how this intellectual tradition winds up being channeled into political activity, it's like, spoiler alert, the issue is, you're racist. They're like, white men suck, right? Like Europeans are bad. Like they're just like, it's basically like white devilism from Elijah Muhammad, right? It's like basically Elijah Muhammad paradigm. Obviously he's associated with a bunch of other problematic things like anti-Semitism and so forth, and pedophilia. But leaving all that aside, I'm not trying to tar everybody with that. Anyway, but like this whole idea of just like the secret is, men are bad and straight people are bad and cis people are bad and white people are bad and all this. And what's curious about that is how often, Western colonial, I shouldn't even say Western, right? What I'm trying to say is how often colonial concepts are reified and reinscribed by these discourses that are allegedly trying to disrupt them, right? So, the whole concept of the West is an artificial construction, right? We can, instead of saying, oh, the West is bad or the West is good, we can say there is no the West, right? Along with the dude from Network, right? There are no nations. There are no peoples, right? These are abstractions. Like the way that we are conditioned to think about things is holding us back. Anyway. But so similarly, within this post-colonial tradition, it's like, which bleeds obviously into things like the Marxist tradition and so forth. It's like, well, what's the answer, right? It's something that people talk about a lot, that it's like, you're not going to conquer, these imperial militaries, right? You could conceive of some sort of, completely asymmetrical whatever. But the problem is, like, you can never get that organized because of the surveillance capabilities that are currently available. You're going to be infiltrated before you even get started, right? And so, like, the point is, even coming back to Baudrillard again, I don't know if he mentions involution here, but like Baudrillard basically counterposes involution to the paradigm of revolution. And, Baudrillard has his own issues or whatever, but like, this is where to go. This is important. Like, and so involution, this is self-disruption, right? The compulsion to repeat, the tendency to reproduce and revive even those past events that involve no satisfaction whatsoever. So, he's engaging with psychoanalysis, this tendency to repeat. We can also bring that back in here in terms of holding on to these cherished beliefs. So I basically see that Dr. Zweibelson is obviously talking about highly important topics within the military, but it also appears that, Dr. Zweibelson still has to play ball, right? Dr. Zweibelson can't necessarily open up the idea of European colonialism in this essay. But basically what I wanted to say about it was, in my way of thinking about it, we can take European, like it happened, right? This happened, right? And again, I don't care about the money, but like the centralization of resources and, the establishment of, a world system dominated by allegedly former colonial powers, right? That happened, right? And so we have Western supremacy or whatever in practice. We can currently talk about, is it being challenged by China or whatever? But like, we don't know. Like, I just offer to you right now with the whole UFO thing. Like, are UFOs just advanced technology the United States has? And the United States has vastly more powerful technology than anybody else. Who is the United States, right? Like, does Congress control that? Is the president aware of all of the capabilities? And within that, who is, right? Like, I don't know. I'm not trying to be conspiratorial. I'm also not even trying to denounce anything. Because again, going back to, why don't we have democratic accountability? Why don't we have an informed electorate, right? In the similar way, why don't we have soldiers capable of questioning orders or, asserting that they understand better than their commanders? Because, these sorts of hierarchies are very important for maintaining, again, a semblance of order. Imagine if you had 8 billion people thinking outside the box, doing their own thing. You wouldn't be able to go to the grocery store, right? Because people would think of better things to do than to drive the truck there or to be a cashier or something. And so, like, as we're thinking about social change, we're thinking about, making self-disruptive systems, forming new patterns of solidarity, building a new social fabric. we basically need to come up with new motivations to do some of the same things, right? Because there are certain things that need to get done, and we can valorize that, and we can distribute it more. We can share the burden. We can try and destigmatize things that are considered crappy jobs or something. And we can also encourage people to flourish. Everybody can be a philosopher regardless of what they do, right? So anyway, as regards the basically the treatment of European colonialism, what I want to say is, as Zweibelson is here talking about, the pseudoscientific management theories of the 19th centuries and the military traditions, one of the core military traditions of the 19th century was colonialism, right? And along with pseudoscientific management theories, we have things like pseudoscientific theories of racism. These are all happening at the same time, right? And so basically my idea is that the Europeans or whatever, the Western, all these, there's no good way to talk about anything, so apologies, but these sorts of currently dominant military establishments, which are successors to colonial empires, or arguably still are colonial empires, it's possible to get extremely triumphalist about the ideas that were around when you achieved this great success. It's basically a giant frickin' cargo cult around rationalism and these national myths. That's what we have, because cargo cult again, because we were doing it this way when we had all this success and the Industrial Revolution happened, so we better just continue thinking that way forever. And so that really needs to be brought up. It's difficult because I think for some people, like European, whatever, like some men or whatever, like for some people, it makes it harder to hear the message that part of the reason why our ideas are fucked up is because, there's a history of brutalizing the world and being very good at it. And therefore, not just assuming we have superior military ideas, but also assuming that our culture is better and, all of these sorts of things. That's not to say that we have to throw away everything that we believe, right? But what's the kernel of it, right? And that's where we get into important questions like, what is the essence of democracy? Is the essence of democracy elections? So that's where the discussion needs to go, and I think it becomes basically the horizon of this type of thinking is, how do we expand people's capacities philosophically and in terms of their consciousness, while not having too much disruption. Because it's all well and good. Yes, I want disruption, right? I want things to change. At the same time, I don't want there to be a nuclear war. I don't want somebody to use AI to hijack a bunch of drones and kill everybody. Like, I don't want there to be genetically modified bioweapons that kill everybody. There are certain forms of disruption I don't want, right? And so that is very important in terms of thinking through our creative process. But I think that the idea that the reason why we have this sort of, or not the reason, but one of the reasons why we have this sort of, inability to move on is that we have this cargo cult mentality among Europeans or the West or whatever you want to say, modern militaries and most advanced, whatever. And to an extent, this would also be present, right, in a China or a Russia or whatever. Like, all these sorts of things have permeated through, different places, just the same way people will wear Western business suits, right? Just because, again, it's associated with the success of Western places, right? Anyway, so it's like, that's how you dress, right? And this is how you think. So I think we need, basically a increasingly more balanced and, self-disruptive approach to, looking at the post-colonial period, where we're all ready to look at and sacrifice cherished beliefs. But that goes for everybody, because at this point, many of the oppositional and, pseudo-disruptive discourses have themselves ossified. And that's exactly what Baudrillard is all about. That's why Baudrillard is so good, because exactly what he's talking about is the ways in which, our discourses can turn into simulation models. And we're losing, this basic level that he calls symbolic exchange, which is where, we're confronting the challenges of the world. We're putting everything at stake. We're not hiding behind an identity. We're not hiding behind a concept. We're not hiding behind the concept of rationality, right? We are at the point, I don't know if he has, you know, like in terms of looking at the rationality and rationalism, like that's so much of what Baudrillard's doing, right? And so similar to, you know, Zweibelson here in the military, you know, being somebody, member of the military, you know, certainly still loyal, right? It's like we're not, and I'm not, you know, I'm not talking about being disloyal to like the overall civilizational project or whatever. I mean, we can throw the whole category of civilization into question. But, you know, we're basically sitting here trying to help because, you know, the very powerful bureaucracies that are deciding so much can get stuck in their tracks. And so can so many of the other disruptors. So just because I bring all this up doesn't mean that I'm not doing this as well. That's why it's so important and why I've been so excited to connect with Dr. Zweibelson, because it's great to try and form a community of people who are trying to do this sort of self-disruptive business. And we can, you know, give each other order. We can help each other with emotional regulation, for example, as emotional stability, because it's so easy to waffle between intellectual excitement, passion for disruption, but on the other hand, you know, insecurity, self-doubt, and internalized bad feelings that come from facing the kinds of headwinds that we often do. And so, you know, that's my horizon. Here I am. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. In case you want to reach out to me, feel free to do that. My email address is adam@wrfg.org, or just leave a, just leave a comment here on the video. And with that being said, that's the end of this video. So thanks for listening.